10 Crucial Events That Changed MMA Rules. One of MMA's biggest myths is that there aren't many regulations. Certain movements are prohibited depending on how your hands are positioned underground. Specific angles of elbowing are prohibited. The rule set also has an increasing amount of pointless minutiae the more you delve into it. Therefore, this misunderstanding that there are curfew laws is more a holdover from the past than anything else. Punches to the back of the head, hair pulling, ball punches, knees on the ground, etc. Before being prohibited for obvious reasons, everything used to be legal. However, many absurd rules had to be created because someone attempted to do them. In this video, we will be talking about 10 crucial events that changed MMA rules. Let's begin. Number 10. Vaseline Gate. Vaseline is typically applied to a finger's face before almost all battles in combat sports and is replenished between rounds. Vaseline in short reduces the likelihood of skin being cut and lessens friction from incoming shots, which is important because it's plainly undesirable to have a fight broken up due to a cut. However, a fighter's cornerman was permitted to use this after each round up to UFC 94. If you ever touched petroleum jelly, sometimes called Vaseline, you know how slippery it is. Therefore, concerns were understandably raised when George St-Pierre's corner started improperly applying the chemical on his shoulders, chest, and back during his defense of the World Roy title at UFC 94. Since that was a tiny amount, no one can now be certain that it was an honest error or a sincere attempt to deceive BJ Penn, who faced him that night, was enraged. Number 9. No more Speedos. Few sports have a greater discrepancy between male and female supporters than mixed martial arts. Our channel numbers fairly clearly show that. That is why we have ring girls rather than Magic Mike types walking around the cage unless you are an Invicta. But at UFC 133, Dennis Hellman not only competed inside the octagon but also ended up losing by TKO to Brian Ebersol. The latter added to the strangeness by getting an arrow-shaped light into his chest. Hellman was dressed in a pair of very tight blue trunks and made excuses about losing a wager with his teammates and other such things. In the aftermath, Dana White expressed his shock and horror at what he had witnessed. Hellman won by submission in his subsequent bout. Number 8. 12-6 elbows. Perhaps the most absurd rule will remain in place, especially if your name is John Jones, because athletic commissions were alarmed after witnessing martial arts exhibitions in which participants would break like a whole foot of ice or something similar, boards that were pre-weakened, or that kind of stuff. This straight up and straight down elbow is most frequently prohibited. Although this is a factor, it is only a portion of the cause. Big John McCarthy, who was also present during the initial formal creation of the unified rules of mixed martial arts, said that this maneuver was prohibited while speaking on the Joe Rogan show. Additionally, 6'10" Gan McGee at IFC Battleground 2 faced Brad Gabriel, a significantly smaller opponent, due to one fight in the year 2000. McGee, who would later make a bid for the UFC Heavyweight Championship, repeatedly hit his opponent with these downward elbows, and it was one of the medical professionals' presence that would help John McCarthy develop unified rules. At first, the doctor wanted to outlaw all elbows, but after learning about John McCarthy, he decided to only outlaw the 12-6 downward elbows. He stated that the main cause was this battle. Number 7. Throwing an opponent over the cage. Despite the fact that Tank Abbott-Stay had few regulations, you already know he's kind of the person who, even in modern mixed martial arts, would break the rules if he thought he could get away with it. And his actions during his matchup with Cal Wersham at Ultimate in 1996 resulted in the creation of an instant rule that many fans may not have even immediately considered. In the end, Tank won easily, but it was clear that there should be no longer a chance for a fighter to fall 6 feet headfirst into a metal platform. Soon after, Big John McCarthy decided that anyone who attempted to hurl their opponent over the edge of the cage would be disqualified, which made people realize that fence grabbing should probably be also prohibited. Number 6. Short grabbing. Fighting shorts don't impede movement by being constantly dishelved or untucked, as they did with the original gis and continue to do in modern full gi BJJ contests. However, both fighters' shorts inexplicably proved important to the contest and the 1998 bout between Pat Miletich and Milky Burnett for the first welterweight title. Both Miletich and Burnett kept a firm hold on to one another's shorts throughout the whole bout, which made it incredibly boring because neither combatant could frequently break free and start fighting. Not only did it result in a plainly unremarkable first title match, but the audience also considered the entire situation to be quite humorous. Burnett's shorts needed to be fixed, which put John McCarthy in the unpleasant position of having to work dangerously close to Burnett's privates while giving viewers an excellent view of the military's right butt cheek. Short grabbing was immediately outlawed. For obvious reasons, fighters were no longer permitted to utilize them as leverage. Number 5 is the introduction of TKOs. In the original UFC, there were only 3 possible ways for a bout to end: by knockout, submission, or the cornerman giving up. But even these basic guidelines weren't followed at the first UFC event when Taylor Lee, a sumo wrestler, was hit with a powerful head kick by Gerard Gordillo, sending his tooth flying into the front row. That's because the first referee understandably stopped the fight when he saw the risk. Thus, McCarthy was completely powerless to stop the fight due to the rules. And it seems that when Big John yelled at Morris's corner, Pat Smith heard it and decided to stand up, or he just decided that it was over, signaling the end of the vicious assault. If it had continued, you could only speculate. Therefore, following the incident at this specific time, McCarthy horrifiedly promised to resign if given no authority to safeguard combatants. Thus, the idea of referee stoppages was introduced in UFC 3. Number 4. Groin shots. Former UFC fighter Gary Big Daddy Goodrich purchased luta libre specialist Pedro Octavio in the finals of the one-night competition. While groin shots were illegal, thanks to the Brazilian organization, eye-gouing and biting were not. Goodrich compiled by striking right at his opponent's prized possession. Still, he would go further than the just kneeing Octavio's balls by literally digging his feet and toes into Pedro's trunks to try to avoid being on the bottom. Number 3. Lay down and catch prey. Before their rematch, Gracie and Ken Shamrock won numerous competitions and titles following their initial bout at UFC 1. The original face of the UFC, Gracie, won the UFC 2 and 4 competitions, while Shamrock went on to defeat Pancreas and win the first title in Japan. Therefore, it is clear that there was a lot of anticipation for the two's rematch at UFC 5, with fans eager to see how Ken would fare against Gracie's submission strategy on the second attempt. But instead of the intriguing grappling contest everyone had hoped for, we saw a ton of inactivity, with Shamrock laying tight in Gracie's guard, mostly just avoiding submissions and barely taking the risk to land much of his ground and pound. There was also no ruling to stand up to the fighters for inactivity. The fighter was the longest in UFC history at 36 minutes, and it was the first draw in the promotion's history. Shamrock did nothing but lay defensively on top of Gracie throughout that time. Number 2. Introduction of judges. The previous UFC leadership disliked the idea of having to use judges. With ref stand-ups and over time, they aimed to address the issue of passivity and avoid further draws. While Oleg Taktarov and Ken Shamrock faced off at UFC 7 with Ken's super fight title on the line, a finish was not achieved despite standing both men up and pleading for help. Shamrock was the aggressor, but he had hardly moved throughout the 33 minutes, making a halt impossible. King said in his autobiography that he didn't want to cause Oleg, who would train with Leon's 10, too much harm, but he was also well known back then for brutally training individuals with a coaching technique that just bashed everyone up. Number 1. Champions weight cutting. Most of us can readily agree that weight reduction is the most ludicrous component of the sport. Most fighters undergo horrifying dehydration to avoid being the smaller, heavier opponent. Yang Jianbing, a 21-year-old Chinese flyweight, paid the ultimate pay for this madness when he sadly died while attempting a particularly challenging weight cut during fight night in December 2015. It's terrible that it took a death for the law to change, but as a result, one championship drastically changed its weight loss procedures and used hydration testing to stop all weight loss efforts virtually. However, there are still many unanswered questions about this, as many boxers appear substantially larger on fight night. Examples include Eddie Alvarez, whose walking weight has reportedly reached 190 pounds in the past despite being lighter than the average at 170 pounds as opposed to 155. If you're that heavy, you shouldn't be able to pass hydration testing. He has also said that in one, his opponents are bigger than him. Regarding his rivals, DJ said the same statement. At atom weight, it's the opposite for Angela Lee, who seems larger than her rival. They finally started posting video weigh-ins in the past month or two. Of course, it's still possible that Angela Lee is trying to keep within dehydration limitations and only needs the last little piece of the article of clothing to shave it off, even though she continues to show up needing to use a hoop, which is indicative of a weight cut. That is all for this video. We will be back soon with another informative video. Don't forget to like and share this video. Until next time.